From the Campbell Student Union on the campus of Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. A debate between the candidates for the 1st Congressional District of Wisconsin. Tonight's debate will feature the incumbent, U.S. Representative Paul Ryan, a Republican from Janesville, and Rob Zerban, the Democratic challenger from Kenosha. The debate will be moderated by Professor Jeffrey Roberg, the chair of Carthage's Political Science Department. And now, the president of Carthage College, Gregory Woodward.
Good evening. Welcome to Carthage College. It's an honor to host this debate tonight between my two good friends, Paul Ryan and Rob Zerban. I think we're going to have a great night. I'm going to ask you all to just be sure that you have your cell phones off and that you exhibit professional and responsible decorum here throughout the debate. We only have 1 hour, so let's get all the questions and all the talking we can in. Let's not have any communication with the audience. We'll just sit and be listeners tonight. There'll be a chance to talk afterwards. There's a reception downstairs. I hope you can all join us right in the living room here at the Student Union right after the debate is over. In case you're curious, Professor Jeffrey Roberg is a professor and chair of our Political Science Department. He has written on human rights and environmental politics in the former Soviet Union and throughout Latin America. He's an author and a scholar, and I'm pleased to introduce Professor Jeff Roberg.
Thank you, President Woodward. Good evening. On behalf of Carthage College, I welcome you to tonight's debate. The format for tonight's debate, as agreed to by the candidates' campaign staffs, is that each candidate will give a 3-minute opening and closing statement. The speaking order was determined by a coin toss, with the winner deciding whether to speak first in the opening or closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to alternating questions asked by me. The candidate who speaks second in the opening statements will answer first in the question segment. For each question thereafter, the order will alternate. 1 week ago, the candidates were given the general topics that would be discussed tonight. However, the candidates were not told in advance what the questions would be and had no input into the construction of the questions or the topics addressed. Finally, I want to thank the audience in advance for agreeing to remain silent during the course of this debate. With that, let's begin. Mr. Ryan has the opening statement.
Well, thank you. Dr. Roberg, I want to thank you for moderating this debate. Rob Zerban, thank you as well. I want to thank the people here at Carthage. This is one of the best institutions here in Wisconsin. It's a crown jewel here in Kenosha on Lake Michigan, and they've been hosting these debates for some time, so I just want to thank the good people here at Carthage College. I have a great job. It's an absolute honor to have this job. And one of the reasons I say that is because I consider my job as an employee of the people of the 1st District who are my employers. There are 3 basic responsibilities that come with this job, and it's one of the ways in which I measure my success or not. Number 1, provide principled representation. Number 2, be accessible. Number 3, provide flawless constituent service. What do I mean when I say that? Principled representation. Tell people who you are. Tell them what you believe. What are your principles? What are the policies you're going to advocate? Then, if you win, do it. Be accessible. Since having this job, I have held over 600 listening sessions, open-door meetings with constituents across this 1st Congressional District. I have advisory boards comprising of farmers, educators, healthcare workers, realtors and builders, manufacturers, small business people, on and on and on. Flawless constituent service. This is something we take great pride of in my office. You would be amazed at the kinds of things that the federal government can do to people. You'd be amazed at the kinds of problems people experience. We have gotten very good at navigating the federal government on behalf of the constituents, the residents of this district. Since taking office, we have helped over 62,000 people with particular and specific problems that they have had with the federal government. In the last 2 years alone, over 8,000. I don't think the country's on the right track. We have very large problems. These problems aren't getting any better. They aren't getting even easier. I believe if you don't think we're on the right track, which I don't, we owe people an alternative. That is why my entire career has been revolving around the idea of offering solutions. If you don't like the direction, don't just criticize, put up solutions and alternatives. That's what I've been doing. I believe that the next half a dozen or so years will determine the trajectory of this country for a long time. And the questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves is, are we doing what we need to do to secure a better future for this generation and for the next generation? That's why I do what I do. That's why it's an honor and a privilege to serve people in this district, to do the things that come with this job, and to try and make a difference to fix problems that are broken and offer constructive solutions. And that's why I want to thank people for hiring me as their employee.
Thank you. Mr. Zerban.
Thank you. I too would like to thank everybody for being here tonight, Carthage for hosting, Dr. Roberg for moderating, Congressman Ryan for joining us, and thanking my wife for her continual support through all this. I hope tonight's debates give everybody an opportunity to see a difference in the approach that Congressman Ryan and I have to finding solutions to problems. I think that the way we approach them are shaped by our experience, and we have some similarities in our background, and we have some differences. We both were, for a period of time, raised in single-parent homes. We both benefited from government programs to get an education. And since having received that assistance, graduating from college, Congressman Ryan went to Washington, D.C., and either has spent his whole adult life either working as a politician or working for politicians. I would say he's gotten so good at the Potomac two-step that I think he may have forgotten where the Root River and the Pike Creek are. I approach things very differently. I was a small business owner. I was somebody who had to approach problem solving, knowing when to invest a dime to save a dollar, which I think is really important. Oftentimes, too often these days, I think bureaucrats and people who've been in Washington, D.C. for too long just tend to try and throw the baby out with the bathwater. I really appreciate your time and attention, and hopefully by the end of the debate, you guys will have had some more information to help make a decision on who you would like to see represent you in the next legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start tonight's questioning then. The first question will deal with the issue of higher education, something we may know a little bit about here. According to an article in USA Today, a little over a week ago, median annual wages last year were $20,350 for people who didn't finish high school, $35,580 for high school graduates, and $68,190 for college graduates. Understanding these disparities, like most college and university students in the country, the vast majority of our students receive grants or take out loans to afford the cost of a bachelor's degree so that they can have a higher income down the line. Is higher education for all a value that you believe in? If so, what is the best way to support our students as they seek a degree in higher education, and what concrete revisions to the current system of grants and loans should be carried out so that students can achieve their degrees without excessive debt when they graduate? We begin with Mr. Zerban.
Thank you. Higher education is very important. I'm a person who knows firsthand what a difference in your life it can make. Since having received that higher education and understanding it's need to be affordable, and with the help of Pell Grants and Stafford loans, I was able to go on and live my version of the American dream to start 2 successful small businesses. So working my way up out of poverty was only possible because of that education. And I think we've seen through Congressman Ryan's actions of having voted for cutting Pell Grants and Stafford loans, reducing funding mechanisms to ensure that people have access to a good quality education and making sure it's affordable is not going to improve the lives of others. What we do need to do is we need to look at systems that actually do provide educations for everybody all the way through college. I'm very familiar with the system in Germany, a country that has a GDP about 1/5 of the size of the United States, and they provide free education to everybody all the way up through college. Now, if a country that has a GDP that is 1/3 of the size of the United States, why isn't we can't achieve that here? And I think we can. We just have to get our priorities straight. And I believe that saddling students with tens of thousands of dollars of debt after they leave college, when they're just making a start and getting, making their way in the world, I think that that's unconscionable. So I think that we need to look at controlling costs, increasing accessibility, and expanding grant and funding opportunities to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to live the American dream that I had.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan?
I too benefited from the student loan program. This is what helped me afford and pay for my education. Let's just say that those statistics are not only right, I think they underscore the situation. The path out of poverty, the path to upward mobility is education. Here are some interesting statistics that I think are very alarming. And you've got a lot of young students in this audience. More people are coming out of college these days with more debt than ever before, with fewer job prospects. Over the last decade, federal student aid has increased by 105%. And the inflation on tuition, public four-year colleges, has risen 5.2% on top of inflation. We have a terrible tuition inflation problem in this country. And what we have learned through lots of different studies is that pumping more federal money into a system is actually propping up inflation. So we've got to find a way at getting at the root cause of tuition inflation. We've got to make sure that everybody can not only afford it, but that we don't come out of college with massive debt. Our debt, our student loan debt in America today is over $1 trillion today. Recently, in July, I put out a series of reforms at getting a handle on this. More transparency as students so we see what kind of education we're getting. More transparency in the books of colleges. Accreditation reform. Bring competition to the typical graduate and undergraduate education system. And also make sure that a dollar going in is a dollar going out, and make sure that we get more money's worth when we get an education. Let's find out if this major at this college actually gets us in the profession that we want. So we want the providers of our academic services competing against each other for our businesses. The budget that I wrote actually full funds Pell Grants at the maximum award for a decade. The problem is the president's budget proposes a huge funding cliff. We don't want irresponsible budgeting. We want to pay for these things. But if we keep punching money in on the right, we're going to have more tuition on the left. And we can't have that.
Thank you.
Or tuition inflation, excuse me.
The next question then will begin with Mr. Ryan. And we're going to turn our attention to Iraq and Syria. This is a three-part question. First, do you support the latest airstrikes on ISIS by the United States and other countries, and why or why not? Second, do you believe these airstrikes will leave the region more stable? And third, given the U.S. currently has a budget deficit of over $17 trillion, would you support a tax to pay for our current military efforts in Iraq and Syria, and retroactively to pay for our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? Again, Mr. Ryan, you begin.
I do support the president's campaign. I think the president made some very significant mistakes early on in the conflict by failing to work with and arm the moderates in Syria, by declaring a red line, then not enforcing the red line, and by not getting a status of forces agreement in Iraq, which helped lead to the destabilization there. So the airstrikes in and of themselves probably are not enough to do the job. Does it leave the region more stable? It can't get much more unstable than it is right now. You have basically whole sections of Syria and Iraq ungovernable, disintegrated leadership with ISIS taking over. ISIS is an extremely sophisticated terrorist army. This is a threat that we have to take very seriously, if only for the reason because they have foreign passports with foreign fighters that could come out of this region and inflict real terrorist damage across the country. So I do not think that the president's current plan is sufficient to fully defeat ISIS, which is his stated objective. I do not support a war tax. I don't think asking more from hardworking taxpayers out of their paychecks is the way to pay for this. I think we ought to cut spending in Washington to pay for this. This is what you do when you prioritize spending. This is why I've always believed in budgeting that these wars should be paid for within our budgets so that we actually cut spending that is unnecessary. Let's go get corporate welfare. There's plenty of areas to cut spending to pay for this, but the last thing we want to do is put more damage on the hardworking taxpayer of southern Wisconsin who's already having a hard time getting ahead, living paycheck to paycheck, making ends meet. The biggest concern I have going forward in Iraq is the potential for the president to micromanage the situation, to play an armchair general, to try and do the kinds of mistakes that LBJ made in Vietnam, which would lead to more protracted. Give the military the mission, ask the military what they need to do their mission, and then support them in doing it.
Thank you. Mr. Zerban?
Thank you. At this point, I do support the president's path in Iraq and Syria. I do support the airstrikes if this is the course of action that he's determined through his advisors, with his advisors. But I do so cautiously. I think that we need to build broad coalitions with any allies we have in the area to bring about any sort of peaceful or diplomatic change that we possibly can, and only after we have depleted every single possibility of a more peaceful solution. I'm never a believer in adding more guns and troops to a region of conflict is going to save more lives or is the best way to go. I'm hopeful that they would leave it more stable. As Congressman pointed out, it couldn't be much more unstable. We've seen the a course of diplomatic action with a coalition of our allies brought about getting rid of the chemical weapons in Syria. It's slowed down the armament of Iran with their nuclear program. So I think absolutely got to try to follow that course of action first. As far as the tax to pay for the wars and in this endeavor, I would point to President Eisenhower. Even knew that he had to pay for World War II with taxes, if we are going to ask corporations to pay their fair share and close the loopholes that they have available to them and stop subsidizing them, profitable industries like oil and gas companies. I don't know if you're going to call that a tax, but they certainly can contribute more than they are right now to the coffers. So I'm cautious with boots on the ground because I'm afraid people who are calling for that right now are either forgot the missteps that we've already seen or never learned the lesson from the past.
Thank you. Our next question will deal with climate change, and Mr. Zerban will have the first response. This is a two-part question. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The climate change we are currently experiencing is in large part due to human activity. Regardless of how you answer this question, what can the United States do to meet the challenges posed by climate change, and what would you do as our representative in Congress? For example, do you support a policy of cap and trade, a carbon tax, letting the market respond to it, or something else?
I wasn't writing down your questions when you, could you repeat them, please? I'm sorry about that.
Where do you want me to start?
The three parts were
sure.
The statement, I'm sorry.
Okay, so do you agree with the following statement, which is that climate change we are currently experiencing is in large part due to human activity? Regardless of how you answer that, what can the United States do to meet the challenges posed by climate change? And what would you do as our representative in Congress?
Great questions. I do believe climate change is man-made. It's real, it's serious, and man-made. Denying its existence is not going to stop it, and it is not going to shield us from the effects of it. Climate change has profound impacts locally through busting budgets, municipal budgets for road repair. I mean, we all saw the tremendously cold winter we had this past year. The drought that's going on in California right now, a couple of years ago it was the Southeast. These severe weather events have local consequences and ramifications. So we do need to address it, and I do believe the U.S. can meet the challenge because there are many opportunities when you see challenges. And part of this is a green economy. The United States can lead in any field at once. We are innovators. We are great at leading the rest of the world when we put our mind to it and when we have cooperation from both sides. And the opportunities are that we understand, if we do understand that Energy security means economic security, and we have to do everything we can to reach that point, reducing our dependency on foreign energy sources and fossil fuels. That goes a long way to creating the economic security that we're all craving. What we can do in Congress is promote these kind of innovations through creating opportunities for solar companies, and you know, I know we've got some plants up here in Wisconsin for making wind turbines and blades. Just up the street in Racine, S.E. Johnson has installed 2 wind turbines and is using the gas from the dump across the street to power their Waxdale plant. So companies are craving changing to this because they know it's a cost saving for them too once we get past the initial investment. And again, this is the opportunity, invest a dime to save a dollar in the long run.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
Climate change is in large part due to human activity. I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't think science does either. Does climate change occur? Yeah, yes, of course we have climate change. We've had climate change forever. Is human involvement involved? Yes, it is. What extent? I don't know. Here's what I do know. When you represent people, you represent the economy, their livelihoods, their ability to make ends meet, and you take a look at proposals coming before you, and you weigh the costs and the benefits. So here's the costs that I know. You asked me about cap and trade, a carbon tax, the coal regulation coming out of EPA right now. One estimate shows that this could cost our economy as much as 224,000 jobs each and every year until the year 2030, all to hopefully, possibly reduce temperatures by 0.15 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. So we would impose these kinds of massive taxes disproportionately hitting low-income people, manufacturers in Wisconsin, with this kind of huge tax when we don't even know whether the science will change it, or if, at best, lower the temperature by 0.15 degrees in a century. In my opinion, the benefits do not outweigh the costs outweigh the benefits. Now, as a person who chaired the Sportsman's Caucus for a number of years, I think we have to be conservationists. That's why I fight for things like wetland restoration, conservation reserve programs. I think we should do more basic research for innovation, for research and development, to have cleaner burning energy. But to put a massive tax on the hardworking taxpayers of this state, a huge tax on the manufacturing industry, which is where we get most of our jobs, I think would be a big step in the wrong direction.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Ryan. Let's turn our attention to the Affordable Care Act. Despite all of the doom and gloom predictions about the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, also known as Obamacare, appears to be doing very well. Healthcare signups have exceeded expectations, premiums are competitive in the marketplace, and healthcare spending is falling. How do each of you explain this? And is it fair to say that Obamacare is working?
That's leading the witness. I disagree with the premise of the question, no doubt there. Here's what I see. I see a law very poorly written, poorly implemented, not even fully implemented, big premium increases, forcing people to buy insurance that they don't necessarily want. But what I see coming in the future is even worse. I see an employer mandate that is going to encourage employers to dump their employees in the Obamacare exchange. I see the actuaries at Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services telling us by the end of this decade, healthcare providers in our state will be reimbursed at Medicaid rates for Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare, which is 60 cents on the dollar in this state. Therefore, I see healthcare providers having to overcharge the private payers who will dump more people into it, and I see a system where it implodes under its own weight, where healthcare providers go bankrupt. I see a law that takes $716 billion from Medicare to spend on creating Obamacare, and then puts on top of Medicare a board of 15 unelected bureaucrats appointed by the president who are now in charge and empowered to put price controls on Medicare that will lead to denied cares for seniors. So I see a law that turns Medicare into a piggy bank for health care. The shame of it all is we spend so much money on health care as people, 2.5 times per person than any other country. We could have had a system, and I offered a full-scale proposal alternative to Obamacare while it was being delivered, the Patient's Choice Act. We could have had a system where we can have access to affordable health care for every American, including people without pre-existing conditions, without this costly government takeover, without this system that's going to cause lots of providers to go bankrupt, without a system that is causing the Catholic Church to violate their conscience if they want to comply with the law, without telling people what to do. I think we could have done better. I think we will do better if we switch to a consumer-directed, patient-centered healthcare system. And I do believe that this law will not last and that it will have to be replaced.
Thank you. Mr. Zerban.
I would explain it in that the Affordable Care Act is very popular. We're so hungry for seeing something done that it is meeting a need and fulfilling that need quite adequately. The ACA was a great step in the right direction. It provided patients with protections, provisions that they've never had before. Young adults can stay on their parents' plan until the age of 26. It's removed caps on what insurance companies have to pay. There's no more pre-existing conditions. These are great. Millions of people now have coverage that have never had coverage before. So anytime you can save money and cover more people, I think that's a great step in the right direction. Now, as a small business owner, I had my employees on the same health care plan that I had, HMO, PPO, Blue Cross Blue Shield, executive plan insurance. It was very expensive. It's what corporate executives had, and my staff were dishwashers, line cooks. I subsidized it by 75% to make sure that they could afford it. I had 90% of my employees in it. And I want to tell you that this was during the Bush administration. We saw my premiums going up 10, 12, 18% year after year. President Bush was in the White House, Republicans had both control of the House and the Senate, and their answer to address this problem was to do absolutely nothing. So I'm glad that we got the ACA passed, because it was about time somebody did something to address these spiraling healthcare costs in this nation. I don't know if I can put any better than that, so thanks.
Okay. Well, let's stay with this topic a little bit differently and talk about Social Security and the Medicare system then. So the Social Security Administration stated in one of its 2010 bulletins that trust reserves are projected to become exhausted in 2037. At that time, continuing taxes are expected to be enough to pay 76% of scheduled benefits. Moreover, the number of Medicare beneficiaries is expected to grow 36% over the next decade, and according to 2013 Congressional Budget Office estimates, annual net spending on Medicare will jump 80%, from $508 billion this year to $914 billion in 2023, thus raising costs to the program, even if the cost per person does not rise. How would you propose dealing with these issues, and why are your solutions better than your opponents? And we begin with Mr. Zerban.
Well, there are fixes for Social Security and Medicare. My position is that for Social Security to make it solvent for future generations is we simply need to scrap the cap on incomes above $117,000. I've never understood how it was fair for somebody earning more money to pay less taxes than somebody earning less than $117,000. So just basic tax fairness will go a long way to making Social Security whole. And with Medicare, we can achieve cost savings by bringing more people into the plan. Medicare, for me, along with health care, should be combined, and we should have Medicare for all across this country. If we include healthier populations and can get cost efficiencies by reducing the waste and the fraud and abuse in the plan, we can save money and cover more people and improve the coverages. What we can't afford to do is to have things like Medicare Part D, that when the Republicans passed it, turned out to be nothing more than a big gift to Big Pharma, giving up the federal government's fundamental right to negotiate for the price of prescription drugs. If you get the kind of government that Republicans want, it turns out to be a big gift to big industries and cost taxpayers millions and billions of dollars. And so that's a course we can't follow. You know, Congressman Ryan has proposed what he calls premium support, which it essentially turns Medicare into a voucher program and doesn't do anything to address the cost of health care, but simply shifts more of the cost onto the backs of senior citizens. This was a very controversial proposal that he put in his budget, very unpopular because, by and large, senior citizens to the tune of 88 to 90% love their Medicare because it works well. It is the best delivery system in our country, and it's only expensive because nobody has been doing anything to address the root cause of that cost, and that is getting our healthcare expenditures under control.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
These are the two, I would argue, most important programs in the federal government. They've done a lot for me and my own family. They are going bankrupt, though. And not doing something to fix it means one is being complicit with their bankruptcy. We will have a 23% across-the-board benefit cut to every person on Social Security in 2033 when the trust fund's exhausted. The Medicare Part A trust fund is going bankrupt in 2030. Here's the reason. It's demographics. Baby boomers are retiring at 10,000 people a day at that pace for 10 years. So we have almost a 90% increase in the retirement population in this country, but only a 19% increase in the tax-paying population following them into the workforce. And these programs grow 6 to 8% a year. They're pay-as-you-go systems. Current workers pay their current taxes for current beneficiaries. So herein lies our big fiscal problem. And so what do you do if you're elected to represent people and you see a big problem like this? Don't just criticize, propose solutions. With respect to Social Security, I helped formulate the solution at the Fiscal Commission, the Bull-Simpson Commission, which I think had some pretty good recommendations. I would means test it more, meaning not as much of a benefit increase for those who are higher income. I would raise the minimum benefit to make sure that everybody's out of poverty, and I would adjust it in future years for age. It was never a system designed to last as long as it is. That's one of the reasons why it's going bankrupt. So for longevity in the future, I would raise the age limit about a month every 2 years, which is what Social Security recommends in the longevity tables. Medicare. The Medicare reform proposal that I put out there, I wrote with Alice Rivlin, President Clinton's first budget director, and co-authored with Ron Wyden, the Democrat chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. It is the mainstream proposal. Medicare for All, which is another way of saying single payer, is to the left of the Democratic Party, which is basically saying, let's have the government take over health care, and I think that would be a big mistake.
Thank you. We'll now turn our attention back to the world at large. Politicians and the news media always seem to talk about this ambiguous concept of leadership. What do you view as the role of the United States in the world, and what does U.S. leadership mean to you? Are there circumstances when we need to use international organizations like the United Nations, or can the United States do what it likes whenever it believes it is in its own self-interest to do so? And we begin with Mr. Ryan.
Leadership is not be another list of a long line of mediocre countries. We are the world's superpower, and I think we should act like it. Quite frankly, I think lately we haven't been, and as a result, the world has become less prosperous and less safe. Here's what leadership means, in my opinion. Number one, have the largest military in the world that is indisputably the most strongest military. I think the president has made huge mistakes in this area with his budget. He's proposing to shrink our Navy to a level we haven't seen since before World War I, our Army to a level we haven't seen since before World War II, and our Air Force to a level we've never seen before. Lead in trade. The global economy is here, and either it's going to be shaped by the United States with enforceable contracts, women's rights, human rights, the rule of law, or it will be shaped by other countries that do not share our values, China, Russia. Open up our energy supplies. Be a leader. Show that America and North America can become the energy dominant player in the globe and no longer having to make ourselves dependent upon foreign sources of oil or Middle Eastern oil. These are things that we are not doing that we should be doing to lead. And I do believe we should work with international organizations. I do believe we should form coalitions. Coalitions are much more likely to be formed if they see us leading. People don't see us leading. I spoke with the president of Korea in April, the prime minister of Japan in April. You know what they first wanted to ask me about? They wanted to ask me about Ukraine and Syria. It's on the other end of the globe. And the reason we're getting these questions from leaders around the world is, where is American leadership? And when they see American leadership receding, they see a vacuum being filled, and aggression will fill that vacuum. Whether it's aggression by Russia, whether it's aggression by China in the South and East China Seas with our allies, or whether it's aggression by Iran chasing nuclear weapons, or by terrorist organizations like ISIS filling vacuums that were created in some parts because of our lack of leadership. This is very costly to us if we don't get this right, and that is why we need a strong America with a strong military, strong foreign and trade policy.
Thank you. Mr. Zerban.
The United States has a role in the world as a leader. We are the world's greatest economic power. We are the world's greatest military power. And whether we're leading nationally or internationally, I would say by building broad coalitions with our allies in regions of conflict or dealing with a humanitarian crisis or tackling something as serious as climate change. This is what a leader does. You lead on these issues. Now here at home, whether you're dealing with trying to innovate in ways to deal with healthcare or with education, new technologies, be a leader in green technology, green energy, that's what leaders do. They lead the way. What we can't afford to do is we can't afford to project to the world the image of a country that doesn't have its own act together. And some of the things that have happened that I would point to, shutting down our government does not send the right kind of image. Irresponsible comments about how the Wall Street I'm familiar with is okay with defaulting on our debt. That caused a serious downgrade to our credit rating. Actions and words have serious consequences. We must remember the whole world's eyes are upon us at all time, and we need to be very careful with the type of image we are projecting. And if we have nothing but constant dysfunction, gridlock in DC because of the parties not being able to get along, that is the wrong image that we need to send around to the world. So to me, we need to be leading in areas where we can. We need to be responsible with how we conduct ourselves. We need to be a role model to the rest of the world because they're looking to us for inspiration and to be that leader.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention back to the U.S. economy. While unemployment has fallen to 5.9% for the first time since 2008, should we be concerned that corporate profits are up 20% since the recession, yet median income is up less than 2%? How should we deal with this wage stagnation and general inequality of the haves and have-nots? And we begin with Mr. Zerban.
Well, I believe the best way to continue building our economy is, continue to work towards getting to full employment. 5.9 is good, but it's not good enough. And we need to do that with good-paying jobs. We can do that if we continue to invest in America's infrastructure with both public and private investment. What we can't afford to do is follow an austerity agenda and have more trade deals that are going to cost us more jobs around this country. We've seen NAFTA, CAFTA, TPP is out there looming in the wings. And if we have more bad trade deals, and I don't want it to look like I'm anti-trade, I'm for trade, but I want fair trade deals, not free trade deals that put American workers at a disadvantage. When you send jobs overseas to countries where they don't pay a living minimum wage, that puts American workers at a disadvantage. We also need to increase the minimum wage here in our country. Republicans are always wanting to go after programs that help people. They want to cut funding for housing assistance, food assistance. These are important programs. If you want to stop these programs or eliminate these programs, eliminate the need for them is the best way to go about doing that. So if you pay people a living wage, and there's no reason that somebody is working 40 hours a week is living below the poverty line. I am tired of seeing our tax dollars going in and subsidizing corporate profits because they are not paying that living wage. And that's exactly what's happening. Our tax dollars go to these programs because large corporations don't pay a living wage and they rely on these assistance plans to survive. So we certainly need to go back and try to renegotiate the trade deals so that they're more favorable terms to us and increase the minimum wage so that people who are working 40 hours a week are above the poverty line.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
I agree with an earlier statement Rob mentioned about leading by example. It's one of the reasons why I negotiated the first budget agreement in a divided Congress since 1986 with Patty Murray to get some deficit reduction to save things from the sequester like defense, National Institute of Health, and to prevent 2 government shutdowns. I think that's an example of leadership. We have 92 million Americans who are able-bodied in this country, who are adults, who are not working, who are not in the workforce. Wages are flat. Median income is down. I'm not worried about corporate profits as much as I'm worried that those corporate profits aren't creating jobs and aren't creating the kind of upward mobility we want and need so that people can get where they want to get in life. We have 45 million people living in poverty. So our system isn't working to reacquaint people with the American idea so they can get the jobs they need, so they can get the jobs they want. What do we do about it? I think we have the worst tax system in the industrialized world, which is making it harder for businesses to create jobs, to bring money into our communities to help grow. So we need faster economic growth. I think that's key. We need regulatory certainty. I can't tell you how many times I tour businesses here in southern Wisconsin that tell me, what is the government going to do to me next? I got this regulation, that regulation, this regulation. I can't keep track on it, and I'm not going to create jobs. That's something that's got to be dealt with, which is this regulatory uncertainty. We need to pay down our debt. We have a future of debt and a debt crisis where we know without a shred of doubt we're giving the next generation a lower standard of living. How's that for confidence in the future? We need to get a handle on our debt and our fiscal situation. I mentioned earlier, energy, we could create so many good paying jobs by opening up our energy and by lowering our costs. We have to get skills. This is why I helped vote for and create the Skills Act. Consolidating job training programs spread across 49 different government programs and 9 different government agencies to bring those skills dollars to here to home, so a person who needs skills to get a good job can do so. So there are a whole multitude of answers, but those things, there's no substitute for real economic growth, and these things, I believe, are keys to getting a faster economy.
Thank you. Let's stay with this for a moment then and talk specifically about women. While there are several different indicators we could look at, on average, women are still making less than men today. What are specific ways that you think we can improve the economic status of women and their earning power so that female students in the audience today can expect better pay equity in the future? And we begin with Mr. Ryan.
Well, first of all, we have equal pay should come with equal work. We have a law on the books that says women cannot be discriminated against in the workforce based upon gender. That is a law that needs to be enforced if it's not being applied. Second of all, we need to make the workforce rules more flexible so that people can get flex time so that they can have job hours that can work for their personal schedules. Third, education. I keep going back at this. We've got to get at the root causes of tuition inflation. I believe that there are creative solutions like accreditation reform that can make it easier for women to get education without having to leave their home. Perhaps they want to go online and get a theology class at Notre Dame, a math class from Carthage, and an accounting class from Northwestern, and be able to assemble a degree from where they are to meet their needs and their hours. So we need more flexibility for the 21st century workforce to give women the ability to be able to customize education to meet their personal schedule. That's why I supported the comp time. That's why I support flex time. I think there are a lot of things we can do to make it easier for people with complex issues in their lives to get from where they are to where they want to be. This is why I put out an entire program to rewrite our welfare system so that we can really focus on getting people from where they are to where they want to be, to customize benefits so that they can meet a specific person's needs so that it tailors to their problems so that they can get a life plan to get their lives back together. Poverty among women is at an all-time high. We've got a real problem where we've got to make sure that we can get people out of poverty, and that is why when you take a look at the war on poverty, this is something that I think is very important, very near to my heart. 50 years, and we have 45 million people living in poverty, and among them are women, single women with kids. I think there's a whole lot more we can do. I don't have enough time to get into it, but there's so much more we can do to give women the ladder of upward mobility, to help them get in the workforce and get the jobs they need. And then if people are being discriminated against, we should prosecute with the full force of the law.
Thank you. Mr. Zerban?
Congressman, some of your words I agree with, but I certainly don't agree with some of your actions. If what you say is true, why would you not support the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009 and vote against paycheck equality in 2008? It's easy to say one thing and do another, and I think you're being a little bit disingenuous with your position here with women's equality. If you weren't, then I think you should have supported those acts. We need equality. We need to end gender discrimination. We need to end all forms of discrimination. And it is simply not enough just to say it, but you need to follow through and do it. And education is a big part of it. It's very important, and making sure that people have the opportunity to get that education that is accessible and affordable. Can agree with your words and your comments about flex time and making sure that people's needs are being met, because we need to be considerate of situations. And But I think that this is why people have a problem with members of Congress right now, is that their actions and their words don't match up. We see this dysfunction, we see a lot of blame on the other side, and nobody working together to solve the problems of our country. I think it's great you were able to work with Patty Murray in finding a budget deal to avoid future shutdowns, but you also too realize you were part of that shutdown and voted with party over people when that happened. There are just so many areas here, like Congressman Ryan said, that we just don't simply have enough time to distinguish the differences between our positions on women's issues and equality. But thank you.
Okay. Our next question will begin with Mr. Zerban, and we'll talk about U.S. debt. U.S. debt is currently more than $17 trillion, as was mentioned earlier. When thinking about how to reduce our debt, Congress and the President have to make decisions about what parts of the budget need to be preserved and what can be cut. For example, our political leaders often have to decide whether to cut various social, welfare, or defense programs or to raise taxes. So far, our politicians have not been able to agree on how to deal with the government's debt. What is your plan to reduce the country's debt, and why is it better than your opponent's plan? Mr. Zerban.
My plan to address the debt is that we need a balanced budget. We need a balanced approach when getting to that balanced budget. It needs to have a combination of increases in revenue and cost savings wherever possible. This is what people do as business owners, this is what we do in our household, and the federal government should do it as well. What I will not support is a budget that calls for balancing it on the backs of workers, seniors, and students. I can never support that position. Now, we know that during the Bush administration, they added $5 trillion to the debt. Under President Obama, about $6.5 trillion has been added to the debt. We all saw during the Bush administration, Dick Cheney was the one screaming, deficits don't matter. President Reagan proved that. And I would ask Congressman Ryan where his budget hawk persona was during the Bush administration when they were ringing up annual debt after budget deficit after budget deficit. Where were the Bush boondoggles at that point in time? All of a sudden we get a Democratic president and deficits seem to matter. We have to have serious people making serious decisions, proposing serious solutions. And Congressman Ryan has been absent when the debt was going through the roof during the Bush administration, but all too out front and center when it was the Obama administration. And there's a big difference between being handed the economy, as President Bush was in 2000. We had 4% unemployment, we had a balanced budget, and then the Bush administration came along and had unfunded tax cuts, unfunded wars, running up the national credit card to the tune of $5 trillion. President Obama was arguably handed the worst economy since the Great Depression. We did TARP, we did the American Reinvestment Act. These were critical programs that added to the debt, but we needed to spend that money to make sure that we could get out of the recession as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
These are clever talking points. Fortunately, they're not accurate. When I first took over the Budget Committee, it was during the Bush administration. That's when I first proposed an actual balanced budget plan. That's because I didn't think the Bush administration was going in the right direction in fiscal policy, and I made it very, very clear at that time during the Bush administration. I'll take a second seat to nobody on doing what it takes to actually balance the budget. I didn't hear a plan. I heard balance and balance this and balance that. There's one person that has passed a balanced budget, a plan to actually balance the budget, and that's me, 4 years in a row, and to pay off our debt. How do you do this? You've got to get, and I'm going to answer your question specifically, you've got to get a grip on the drivers of our debt. These are the automatic programs, we call them entitlement programs, that are growing at such a pace that they'll collapse. The government right now is making promises to people that it knows it can't keep. That's dishonest. And so what do you do when you see a problem? Forget about the talking points. You go and put a solution on the table. And I'll agree that not everybody agrees with all $5.1 trillion in spending cuts and savings that I passed in my budgets. But the other point is this. When you say balance, that means I'm going to save some money here, and then I'm going to take more money from hardworking taxpayers to spend on wasteful Washington spending. The budget that people say that's so draconian that I passed, the fourth one now, it says we will grow spending, average annually at 3.5% a year instead of 5.2% a year. Only in Washington is that draconian, increasing spending at a rate lower than what it's supposed to increase at. But doing that actually balances the budget and puts our debt on a trajectory to be paid off completely over time without taking money out of the taxpayers who sent us there in the first place to watch their money. You see, every time you send someone to Congress who says, let's be balanced, watch your wallet, because that means more money coming out of the taxpayers' paychecks and Washington not getting serious and not getting disciplined. And that is why I passed and wrote the budgets that I have passed.
Thank you. Our final question for this evening will deal with the topic of immigration. In 2013, the U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan veto-proof immigration bill that would have provided provisions for tough border security and a 13-year path to citizenship for the approximately 11 to 12 million unauthorized immigrants currently residing in the United States. This agreement appeared to have support from unlikely quarters, including business groups and labor unions, farm workers, and farm growers. Nonetheless, the House of Representatives chose not to take up this bill. Whoever wins this seat in November will have to deal with this issue in the next Congress. How do you propose that we deal with immigration policy in the country? And what do you do, what do we do with immigrants who may have been brought here as young children? And we begin with Mr. Ryan.
I do not support the Senate bill. Number one, I don't think Congress should pass these well over 1,000-page bills that no one knows what's in them. People don't even know what we're voting for, and people in Congress don't know what they're voting for. So I really think you should take immigration in a step-by-step way so that we actually know what we're doing. Point number one, you got to secure the border first. It is very important that we secure the border. We have new threats these days, whether it's heroin coming to our schools from drug cartels, we have problems like Ebola, we have ISIS. Border security must be first and foremost. Number two, E-Verify. You have to be able to verify that a person is who they say they are at the place of job, at the employment level, so that you can turn the magnet off, which makes it easy for a person to get a job through identity theft. Number three, you got to have, in my opinion, a guest worker program so that that person who wants to come and work and make a better life for themselves can do so legally. That takes pressure off of the border. Number four, you've got to reform legal immigration. Transition, I think, from a system that is referred to as chain migration based on relations, keep nuclear families intact, but transition to a legal immigration system that meets the needs of our economy so that labor shortages, where and if they exist, and there are some that exist right here in Wisconsin, can be filled. Number four, and this is where I really have an issue with the Senate bill, you have to find a way of bringing people out of the shadows so they can get right with the law if they're not here legally without providing an amnesty. And I think the Senate didn't do that. You have to preference that legal immigrant, that person that did everything right the first time, the person that followed the rules, paid the fees, waited patiently. That's the person that we don't want to incentivize another one to cut in front of the line. And so I've actually articulated a very specific set of reforms on how to do that. I've helped lead bipartisan talks in the House to bring this forward. The border problem we had with unaccompanied children is what I would argue basically disrupted immigration reform, which I think needs to be restarted. And on the Dreamers, I've also advocated for finding a way to get these young children who are taken here by their parents a way to get right with the law. If we had more time, I'd love to get into it. Let me just say this. Immigration is very important for America. It is America. It just has to be done right with the rule of law and where we can control who comes and goes in our country.
Thank you. Mr. Zerban.
We had it. We had immigration reform with the democratically led Senate, passed with bipartisan support. We could have had it done. And Congressman knows that the differences in these bills from the House version and the Senate version could have been worked out in reconciliation, but they just simply did not want to take it up and solve this problem. And that's failed leadership. Now, E-Verify. Congressman Ryan talks about trying to remove and limit regulation that's imposed upon business. Well, what did you think that was? It's asking businesses to do the federal government's job of verifying who is and who isn't legal. Words and actions don't match up here. So you know, I would have supported SB 744. I didn't agree with every provision that was in it, but you know what? That's what compromise is about. And you did great compromise with Patty Murray. Not everything stood up through the test of time, but you could have done it here again, Congressman, and chose to do nothing. So I'm hopeful that we can actually get a different majority at one point in the House of Representatives with different leadership and actually work towards solutions for these, because many families out there are looking for it. You know, it's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. My wife, Cornelia, immigrated here legally, been here 20 years, and just this past year became a U.S. citizen. So, you know, it's important, and we need people who are going to be there and work together, not be so upset about if they actually do something that they're afraid that it's going to make it look like the president accomplished something on his watch. And they're just so against working together. It's created such dysfunction that we need people who will go and get the job done. And I'd like to have that opportunity.
Thank you. We now move to our closing statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for their closing statement. And Mr. Zerban, you were first.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody being here tonight. I hope this was my first debate, so I hope I did all right. And it's great to be able to have the opportunity to debate somebody who's been at the national level debating Joe Biden. And it was quite a treat for me. So I hopefully was able to illustrate the difference in our positions, adequately describe our different life experiences that would lead us to provide different paths to solutions that confront our country. I would argue that Congressman Ryan has 16 years in the House of Representatives, and what we've seen during those 16 years has been the amount of dysfunction increase in our federal government during that time, not go away. So in business, we have a saying, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution, and if you're not one, you're the other. And so I've had a wonderful time running for Congress. I think my life experience of having worked myself out of poverty, becoming a successful entrepreneur, committing my life to public service after I sold my last company in 2008, has been enough to show you fine people that I would be a great representative for the 1st District here in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
First of all, let me again thank Carthage for this. And Rob, you did a fine job. And let me just say, you're much more pleasant to debate than Joe Biden. Much more polite. Let me explain what I'm trying to do and why. What I'm trying to do is take a look at this country's biggest problems that we at the federal level, who are elected to serve our constituents, need to tackle. I see hardworking taxpayers working harder than ever before and falling farther and farther behind. I see a government that's not respecting them. I see millions of Americans slipping through the cracks and not getting the kinds of opportunities they need. I see a country that is losing its standing in the world. And ultimately, that's going to make us less prosperous and less safe. I see a government that's making really important promises to millions of people who are organizing their lives around these important promises, but can't keep those promises. You know, my dad used to always say the same thing to me. You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. So I see problems, and I'm critical of the direction we are going, and I'm critical of the governing party in Washington. But as a result of that, what leaders do is you propose alternatives. That's what I've done, case in point. I've shown a better way, in my opinion, to govern. How do you save Medicare from bankruptcy so that everybody can count on it? How do you save Social Security? How do you grow the economy? How do you switch our poverty programs from measuring success based on inputs, based on how much money we spend or how many programs we created, to measuring it based on outcomes, results? You know, are taxpayers getting value for them? Are people getting out of poverty? Are we taking a look at the problems confronting our generation today and getting a handle on them? You know, one of my predecessors at the Budget Committee was Leon Panetta, a gentleman I've known for a long time. Most recently, President Obama's Secretary of Defense, CIA Director, Budget Director. He said, in a democracy like ours, you're either governing by crisis or you're leading. And today, we're governing by crisis. That's what's happening. Here's the problem. If we let these problems get out of control, then we will always govern by crisis. We will be reacting and not shaping events and getting ahead of our problems before they tackle us. The good news is we can fix these problems. They're very urgent, they're very real, but they're not insurmountable. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I very deeply believe in the American idea. The condition of your birth doesn't determine the outcome of your life in this country. We believe in equality of opportunity and natural rights and protecting our freedom and our liberties. And we want to make sure that the next generation, that this generation gets these kinds of opportunities. And right now, I think, but for our government, they could be. And that is why I do what I do. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the candidates for their responses tonight. We as citizens only gain by these types of political debates. I'd also like to thank the audience here at Carthage College for their participation in this event, and we all hope that tonight's debate has helped you decide how you'll vote on Tuesday, November 4th. Wisconsinites can be very proud of their turnout for elections. Whether it is during a presidential or a non-presidential year, Wisconsinites regularly go to the polls and have some of the highest turnout in the country. Judging from the crowd in this auditorium tonight, we will see strong voter turnout again this year. Thank you and good night.